and then we'll get started. So welcome. It's good to have you here this morning. Today we're going to be spending the hour talking about project change, and I have this really loaded, very heavy for you. And so it's good to have you. We're going to have a lot of people on here. So let me get rid of this for right now so that we've got some room over here. Good. So let me begin this morning by talking just a second about some changes. I'm going to talk about some changes at the end of the program today. We'll give everybody a chance to get on, but we've got some exciting news to tell you about some new programs that we've got coming out. And so right at the end of the program, we're going to talk about one that's going to be free and that's going to help you be able to pick up 7 PDUs if you choose to be part of it, or if you have people that you're wanting to be part of it. So we'll tell you a little bit about that right at the end. It's going to be coming actually starting in July. And so we'll be talking with you about that. All right, so welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about making project change control work. And like I said, this is a very heavy course, a very heavy set of slides today, because I wanted to get a lot of components together for you in this hour. So let's take a look at a couple of things here. First off, when we talk about change, almost all of us struggle with some type of issue with change orders if you're running waterfall in particular. And so one of the challenges that you consistently get into when you're doing this is this idea of how do you control change and keep people from creeping the scope of the project. Now, before I go very far into this, if you can see me, give me a yes. If you can see the slides, give me a yes. So let's make sure everybody is able to see what we're talking about here. So if you can see me, give me a yes. If you can see the slides, give me a yes. Good. I look frozen. Okay, good. Good to see you guys then. Good to have you this morning. All right. I'm good now. Okay. Let's see here. All right. So we all struggle with change orders from time to time. And so being able to put certain pieces together to be able to control those changes will help us be able to manage this. So there's 4 basic parts to project change management. Once we understand this and we use this, this is going to help us be able to work through this. So the first is going to be designing a strategy for project change, preparation for carrying out project change, implementing the change itself, and then dealing with specific concerns and potential problems of the project change. Now, when we talk about project change, we're really talking about change control system. And most of you do this every day, I know, because many of you, we've been together in class and we've talked about it. But it's a collection of formal documented procedures. Now, the length and depth of those documented procedures is going to be controlled by your organization, the type of project you have, and really how formal it needs to be. Some of your formality might be verbal, and that might be fine on one project. For another project, it might need to be very detailed and step-by-step. But it's a collection of formal documented procedures that define how project deliverables and documentation will be controlled, changed, and improved. Now, what you maybe have noticed is that many times your documentation procedures and your change control process might be much more formal if you're dealing with a contractor than if you're doing it inside or internal. Also, it's identifying, documenting, approving, or rejecting and controlling changes to the project baseline. Now, you remember you have 3 different types of baselines. You have scope, schedule, and cost baseline. And so when you have a change that has been approved, it's going to impact those baselines. All right, so here's some examples of what might be considered a legitimate change. A new way to improve the project deliverable, a recognition of a potential failure in the planned approach, a gap in the plan which has to be included or should be included. We experience this kind of stuff all the time. So this is normal, and this is part of project management. There are things that happen. So when you come across these, you're going to have a legitimate change request that's going to go through a change control process, which we'll show you in just a moment. Now, here's some guidelines that influence project change. One would be a definition of the change process for making the change, and we're going to talk about these. Roles and responsibilities of the team, an analysis of hurdles or resistance, also commitment to change effort, cultural barriers to the change, and then change implemented is actually implemented into the project. So let's run through these very quickly and give you an idea of what we're talking about. So the first piece of this is the influencers on the project. Now, we all have those stakeholders that influence the project, but occasionally we'll have stakeholders that we've overlooked. So we know we have people. We know we have internal knowledge of people and experience that's going to influence it. We also know that the technology is going to influence how we do certain things, and depending on the type of project, it's going to make a huge difference. And then we have also internal processes, the way our organization is structured, the hoops we all have to jump through to get approvals or to get funding or to just get answers in some cases. So all of these are some of the things that we have to deal with. Now, influencing internal processes, here's some questions to consider. Where does the process conflict and make the project process weak? Why are we using this process? Is it mandated or just from past history? And is there a better, more streamlined way of doing this? Now, the purpose for going and looking at the processes is just to remind you that in project management, every lessons learned should be taking us to the point of influencing our project processes. So what that means is that when we do lessons learned on other projects, that should help us readjust our project processes so that they will be much more streamlined for future projects. And so that's what's driving some of these process questions is, are we making adjustments? Are we keeping the same old processes and still experiencing the same problems over and over again? Under the issue of influencing people, what must we do so our project team can better do their job? Where are the team members caught in bureaucratic red tape? And what must be done to reinforce support for the project team? And once again, this is looking at the people side of things. We all have different types of bureaucratic red tape. The way it is the way it is. But the point is that are there ways for us to be able to get around this? Now, let me just get real specific here and give you an example. So if we are working on a project that is high profile and has deadlines that cannot be moved, and it is absolutely a priority project and it's already experiencing problems, then we need to be working with management to be able to speed up the decision-making process. We cannot get a project through if the same bureaucratic red tape is bogging us down in everything. So you've got to be able to get those people either on the team continuously or have access to those people to be able to say yes or no on some of these things. Now, when we look at these stakeholders, sometimes we look at the team and we look at management, but we forget that there are many major and minor and secondary stakeholders. And this graphic here is really just to kind of show you an example of that. You've got your project resources here in the very middle, and then you've got main stakeholders that we deal with on almost every project. You've got the project manager, the customer, executive management, a steering committee, maybe a PMO, and so forth. So we've got those people. But sometimes what we forget about is some of the minor stakeholders that can have a very powerful impact. You've got contractors, might be in a union situation, management, vendor, supplier, creditors. All of these minor stakeholders can have a powerful impact on what's going on. And we're seeing this even as we go through the whole situation here with the virus. You see some of these minor stakeholders that are actually influencing how things are going to be carried out because it just takes time to be able to get some of these things going. All right, so what are the roadblocks then to change? When change comes about, what are some of the roadblocks? Well, the first is going to be limited resources. Nobody has enough resources. We all want more money, more people, more flexibility, more authority and decision-making power. It could be no buy-in from the actual employees themselves. They don't believe in the change. They don't think it's going to happen. Give me a real easy example of this. The airline industry announced this morning at 5:30 on the news that 250,000 people flew yesterday compared to 2.5 million who flew each day just a few months ago. So what's happening here? Well, there's no buy-in from us, the public, on flying. We don't want to be sitting on a crowded plane. We don't want to be sitting next to somebody during this virus, even if I've got a mask on. Most people are still skittish about whether or not it's going to be safe. And of course, rightly so, because we haven't seen proof of it yet. And so you'll see employees that have that on a project, no buy-in from the project. And so what happens is the employees are still questioning whether or not management will support it, whether or not this is really a priority project. Could be lack of planning. Many people do things, run projects on a wing and a prayer. I'm sure you've never heard of that happening. People who are two-faced and they give lip service. What happens is they say yes, yes to your face, and then behind the scenes or someplace else, they say yes to something that's diametrically opposed to what direction you've suggested. Fear of the unknown, and of course, that's going to be very common. And then thinking activity equals success. And we have a lot of this in the workplace right now. People are working their buns off like crazy on a project, but they're not equaling the productivity that they want. And so that's what we're talking about with thinking activity equals success. Now let's look at designing a strategy for project changes. Now, obviously, every strategy, all the processes have to be adjusted to your organization, to your culture, but let me give you some ideas to consider. All right, first off, is there a reason for change? So the business needs have changed and it impacts the project. Well, obviously, if you're in the middle of a 3-year project and the business needs have changed, then obviously it's going to make a huge difference. Your project is going to have to adjust because you're hitting a moving target. Technology has improved since the project started. Many of you folks see this happen all the time. You've got technology new technology has rolled out and you want to be part of that new technology. The price might even be cheaper. Organizational priorities have changed. For those of you who are in government settings, you see this happen. If the governor changes, the organizational priorities change. And so the projects you're in the middle of, many times they are salvaged, but the point is they many times will have a new adjustment to them. Competition. For those of you who are not in government settings, you're dealing with competition. How can I compete against somebody else who has a company very similar to mine? Failure of the present project management processes. We're not happy with how projects are running right now, so we're changing the processes so that they will be able to be more successful with our projects and our culture. And then also legislative, regulatory, legal issues have surfaced. And so that's going to create changes associated with that project as well. So when should change be considered? Now, some organizations want to look at change, and if we look at waterfall, many times because it's a command and control type of system, you look at it to where we've described the scope up front, we're trying to command and control that scope all the way to its completion, okay? When we're talking, though, about change control, you have to understand that the longer the project, the higher the possibility is that you're going to have some change orders. So when should we consider change, and is there an improvement in how the project is managed? Can there be an increase in productivity, simplification of work or process, increased return on investment? If we can make an adjustment and get more return on investment, of course organizations are wanting to do that. A higher output from automation. Can we automate part of this and then we don't need 4 workers doing this any longer? Improved delivery method of product or service of the customer. Improved morale to staff or workers. For an example, with all of this that we've gone through with working from home and having to do Zoom meetings, do you think, and I'm not asking you to respond, but in your mind, do you not think that that's going to change the culture in the workplace? Many school districts are even thinking of that they will be able to get away from snow days because they have Zoom meetings for the kids. So the kids go to school for 3 or 4 days. There's going to be a couple of days of snow they see coming in. Everybody takes their computer home and they're at home on the computer doing their classes during snow days. And so that it will minimize wasted time. So those are just some of the things that just changes our mindset. Zoom meetings and the technology that has exploded in the last 8 weeks has changed the mindset of what we think we can and can't do. So why do expectations become unrealistic? And so we've all been around that customer who they're wanting the Cadillac, but they're paying for the Volkswagen. And so customers take preliminary estimates, which were estimated early in the project, and that's considered an order of magnitude type of estimate. Nothing wrong with that. All of us take these type of preliminary estimates to get the project going, to get the ball rolling, to come up with an estimate. We do that in the early stages. But that should not be our project budget. That's just to get it going. That's the kicking of the tires kind of discussion to see whether or not how much something's going to be. Sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. And so you're asking those questions up front. So you get an order of magnitude, which could be plus or minus 75% off. And then over time, you get that narrowed down towards somewhere around 10 to 15% on budget, and that's called your definitive estimate. That's what you're shooting for to run the project with. And then people overpromise. I'm sure you've been around those folks who everything is, oh yeah, we'll get it to you. We can do that. We can do it. And of course, you're thinking we don't have enough time. We don't have enough people. And yet you'll see people do that. Benefits of a project, service, or products are emphasized while pointing out the negatives are done reluctantly. Internal politics of looking good. And so what happens, we say the right thing so that we look good to those around us. Past successes create false impressions of how fast a project can be created. And so let's talk about this last one for a moment. Many of you have been in project management for years, and nothing wrong with that. That's good. You bring all this expertise. Many of you also have been fully staffed in project management when you have had some major successes in running projects. And so what has happened is that sometimes the success of the past hurts us right now. And the reason for that is because we were fully staffed in the past, but now we've got a skeleton crew. And we're trying to do the same amount of projects in the same time periods that we did before. And that's creating problems and burnout even in the workplace. And so we have to be very cautious with this. So the dynamics of project change focus in several areas. We're looking at business processes. We're looking at risk analysis, because every change has got to be looked at from the eyes of risk. And then we're looking at the cost, schedule, impact analysis. And so what's this going to do to our cost, to our schedule, and what's this just going to do to the resources we need? Do we need different subject matter experts as we work on this? So that brings you to that formality that many people don't like, which is that integrated change control. Now, obviously, let me say it again, this is going to make a difference based on what type of organization you have and what is the length of the project. If the project is shorter, this might not need to be as formal. If the project's longer, it might be very formal, okay? And how much is the project? Based on the budget, what is a big project for you? That might make a difference. So all changes should be recorded in some type of written form, entered into the change management or configuration management system, and even if it's initiated verbally. Whenever change requests may impact any of the potential baselines, a formal integrated change control process is always required. Okay, so let's talk about two sides to this. Now, one side of this is we talk about it from the aspect of a verbal change request. The customer catches you walking down the hall, asks for a change, and so it's a change that you feel that you will make. What should you do? We get these kind of situations from time to time, and all of us have experienced it. You're wanting to be very responsive to the customer. So what do? Well, if you think you're going to grant it, or they have power to say yes or no for that change, and you don't have to go through anything, then you can verbally say yes, but I'm going to go back and get some type of documentation for that change order. Even if I send an email to the customer telling them, here's the change order, here's what we think it's going to do, and here's the impact it's going to have to the budget and to the timeline, you want some type of documentation. Even if you don't need all the formal fancy change control system that we're going to talk about, you still want some documentation. You say, why? Well, let me answer that. Customers sometimes get forgetful about what they've asked for. And you want some documentation as to why you changed from one thing to another. And that email is probably going to be enough. But the point is you want to be able to pull that in case you need it down the road. Now, what if it's such a substantial change that it's really going to impact every baseline you have, scope, schedule, and cost baselines? Well, you can create a formal, that's usually a little more of a formal change request. And in some cases, it might even require going to a change control board. Now, I'll talk about the change control board in a moment, but might be more formal. The bigger the change, a lot of times the more formal it is. And of course, if you're using a vendor, it's going to be more formal almost consistently. So proposed changes can require several things. It could require a new or revised cost estimate. In many projects internally, it's amazing how the customer will turn around and ask for a change order thinking it will not change the due date or the cost. And even on internal projects, you want to push back on that customer and let them know that it's going to take 15 more days and it's going to take $5,000 more. They need to hear that from us so that they understand that this is not a free change order that's not going to have an impact. If not, you'll have change orders all the time where they're just giving you preferences because they think it's not going to make a difference. Schedule activity sequences, also schedule dates, resource requirements, analysis of risk response alternatives. All of these could require this. Now, if you have already done your risk analysis and you have your project plan out and you're running your project as most projects would be functioning, and the customer wants a change request of new work, let's say it is new work, that's going to require a risk analysis for that new piece of work. You have not done a risk analysis on that new work that you're adding, so you're going to have to at least look at this. Okay, so let's look at some of the analysis. Under data analysis. Alternative analysis, it's used to assess the requested changes, decide which are accepted, rejected, and need to be modified. A cost-benefit analysis helps determine if the requested change is worth its associated cost. Now, when we talk about cost-benefit analysis, you're looking at it from the aspect of, if I invest $5,000 here, am I getting $5,000 worth of value for this change request? And a lot of times, the simplest way for us to be able to do this is when you're looking at whether or not, let's do something simple that we've all done and buy a car. If you go to buy a car and there's two cars sitting there, and one car is $3,000 more than the other, they're exactly the same with one exception. One has a sunroof and one doesn't. You have to weigh, you personally will weigh that as a cost benefit analysis, whether that sunroof is worth that extra $3,000. Now, what do you want? You want the sunroof for the same price. That's what you want. But you have to weigh, okay, if I buy this car, it's $3,000 more, and it's no different other than that one thing, the sunroof. Now, some people will buy it without even questioning it because it is worth that return on investment. Others will push back and say, yeah, I'm not paying $3,000 for a sunroof on another car for the same model. That's a cost benefit analysis, and you're doing that, needing to do that for a project. Now, let me share with you a very simplified change control process here. Let me get my glasses on so I can see it. So let's assume, and yours might be a little different than this, but I want you to have a flavor of this. So you've got a change request, and then you have to look at the approach for making the change. Then also anticipated results from the change. By anticipated results, that's why you're looking at time, budget, and resources. What's that going to do in these areas? And then the implementation plan for the change. If the change is approved, it's going to take a certain amount of effort and work to implement that. And then also results and analysis of the change, any lessons learned from making the change, and then of course future planning of the change requests and feedback to management, and then of course documenting it in the best practices. Maybe you missed something in this project, but in the lessons learned it comes back up, and it might make a difference on how you plan future projects. And so that's why you're wanting to use the lessons learned as a knowledge base to be able to help you. Now, the change control board, let's talk about that group of people. Now, not every one of your projects is going to have a change control board as formal as what we're talking about. It's a group of people who are charged with the approval of project changes. They can include several different things. Management, project managers, team members, the customer, different stakeholders might be there. But the point is, these are people who have authority to say yes or no to more money and more time, because what you're wanting to do is you're not wanting to make a lot of changes that just fit into the time period. Every change order should be looked at from money, also from a time period, and that should be given back to the board that there's going to be an impact to the money and to the time period. Once again, because you can't just keep packing more and more stuff into that same time period and for the same amount of money. That's not going to work like that. Now, here's some guidelines that would help with the change control board. If you don't have one or you're setting one up, all project changes have to be documented. Now, you decide to the legalities of it, of what the depth of that documentation is. Project changes must include cost and schedule calculations. Communication and follow through for changes must be precise and tracked, and members must be at all the meetings. And so that means talking about change control members. So the change control board needs to be at all the meetings. Why? Because they have the power to say yes or no to changes. Sometimes, occasionally, and maybe you've experienced this, but occasionally you'll have a change control board that only meets once every 6 or 8 weeks or something like that. For long projects, that might be okay, but for shorter projects, that is not going to work, because you've got changes, especially if it's a command and control kind of situation. You've got changes that are needing to be talked about probably on a weekly basis or at least a bi-weekly basis. All right, so when somebody requests a change, in most cases, the team can request a change, the customer can, management can, anyone can request a change, but there's going to be reasons for this. So several things. So when someone requests a change, is it clear? Is the description of the change clear? Are the reasons for the change very detailed in the document? Is the importance of the change, implications of not making the change, the timing, the urgency of the change, objectives, scope, constraints? that's what you're looking at with that change order. Not just that Bob wants this change, but what's going to happen because of this change. And this is where you have to look at not just the change, but most of you have seen this, it dominoes into all of these other places in the project that we haven't even thought about. And that's why we have to look at every change request and give it true analysis. All right, so if we're looking at the change request, let's walk through this process here and kind of run you through this very quickly here. So a change request is made by somebody. The project team evaluates and evaluates it. If the change is required, then you have some type of cost, schedule, impact analysis to determine what's going to do your project. The project sponsor or the steering committee or the change control board, somebody is saying yes to this and approving it. And then you're going to update your plan, specifications, and contracts, whatever is influenced by this. You'll update your baselines, and you'll also then implement that change. Now, you'll notice the emphasis here, and once it's approved, you're updating your plan. The plan does not stay the same because of the influence of new work. That's the way it should be working. Now, one of the other analysis that you might use is a sensitivity analysis. Now, what if the change costs 10%, 20%, or 30% more? What if the benefits and the return on investment of the project are less than expected? What costs and benefits are the most vulnerable or likely to change? And how does this project compare to internal project standards? So you're doing this sensitivity analysis and looking to see whether or not this is a realistic change or whether or not this change happens to be something that is way out in left field. And not that those don't happen and get approved, but you're looking to see, does this one make sense, or is this something that's really beyond what the real scope of this project is? Excuse me. Okay. So we'll do the sensitivity analysis. Now, one of the things that we get caught in that we have to watch is the impact of change in general. Now, this is called preference change, and this means that you'll notice in the middle here where you see the word core. Well, you have a core change that happens on a project, and a lot of times we get so focused on what that's going to cost and how much time it's going to eat up to implement that we forget that there's a ripple effect into a lot of different areas. And that's the purpose for this slide, is to get us to look at that ripple effect. Now, scope change requests. An approved change request impacting just the project scope and any modifications to the agreed upon project scope baseline as defined by the approved project scope statement. So you started with a scope, it was baselined at the beginning of execution, because remember, that's where you baseline your project. You baseline the scope, the schedule, and also the budget, all at the beginning of execution. And then you measure in execution and in monitoring control against that baseline scope. So the scope has been requested. So some type of change associated with that scope has been requested. So now the team is going to come together and they're going to calculate what's it going to cost in time and money to do and add those scope components. Requested changes to the project scope statement, its components may be generated from the process of creating the work breakdown structure. They're processed for review and approval. And so what that means is that you might find yourself for the new work having to do a new work breakdown structure of the categories of work, and then underneath it, breaking it down into work packages somewhere between 8 hours and 80 hours so that you can determine the cost and also the duration of each of those chunks of work. And that's going to then be given to the customer or the stakeholders or change control board for approval. And the changes could require enlarging the scope or downsizing it. Requests could be oral or written, and then requests may come from within or from outside the project. So who's saying it is not necessarily the problem, even though sometimes it is. The point is that you're looking for the justification of that change order. Now, when we look at scope change control system, it defines the procedures by which the project scope and product scope can be changed. Now here, when we're talking about product scope, we're really talking about the features and the functionality. So when we're talking about project scope, we're talking about the work we have to do to complete the product scope. Now, most of the time when we're talking about it in class, we include them together under scope. And so when we talk about project scope, we assume it has the product scope. But for those of you who are on the technology side, you find yourself separating the features and functionality out. because there's so much work and effort that has to be looked at there. Also, it's integrated with the overall project management information system to control the project scope. It includes documentation for authorizing changes, tracking systems for authorizing changes, approval levels necessary for authorizing changes. And of course, this is where you get into version control as well. What version are we working on here? Okay, so let's assume the change has been planned, the change has been approved, and now we're moving from approval to replanning. Approved change requests affects the project scope, can require modification to the WBS dictionary. We just talked about that. And the project scope statement and the project scope management plan. Now, what that means is that approved change orders is going to necessitate that we have to replan a portion of that project. It might make a difference in replanning that schedule as well. So the schedule change request, once the project's been baselined, the progressive elaboration of deliverables and activities may reveal work that was not initially part of the project baseline. So now it's going to impact the schedule. Remember, we talk about it like a three-sided stool. You've got scope, schedule, and cost. And so the point is they all influence each other. Changes may suggest extending the schedule, accelerating the schedule. Planned schedule activities within the activity list may be deleted or added. And of course, what you're looking at here, if we're deleting activities, it's because we're able to speed things up, or in some cases, because the change request maybe gets rid of those activities because they apply to a particular feature. Also, preparation for project, logical relationships, leads, lags. This is what feeds into a lot of this. Might reveal instances that can generate a requested change to the activity list, to the activity attributes. So all that we're saying here is that when we talk about a lead or a lag, it could feed into, in order to come up with a lag, a change request for some reason in order to delay that piece of work from starting. Or a lead, in order to speed that piece of work up, it might require a change request. A schedule activity may be divided or refined. A lead or a lag is adjusted to diagram the correct logical relationship. All right, so let's talk about the third part of that stool, which is going to be cost. Well, in a cost change request, the cost estimating process may generate requested changes that may affect the cost management plan. Changes may increase or decrease the budget. Once again, most change orders you're not able to do in a vacuum by themselves. It's normally going to impact the cost, the schedule, or the scope of that project. So we get into this whole deal of who's going to pay for this change request. If you're working with a vendor, you've had this many times. So any stakeholder can ask for a change in the project, and the customer may feel that they've already paid for the project and should not have to pay for the changes. And this is a very important piece when you're talking about the customer against a vendor, because if the vendor screwed up, then probably the customer looks at it that, you know what, I shouldn't be paying for it again. But if the vendor is doing something that the customer wants done due to a change order, that's a different deal. So is the change a result of an error made by the project team, an error made by the vendor? Those are different discussions. If the customer requests a change due to an oversight or error, should the developers have to pay for it, or should the organization have to pay for it? And those are going to be internal discussions that will make a huge difference on what's going to be going on with this project. Okay, so next let's talk about procurement. Occasionally you'll have procurement change requests. Change requests may include changes to the contract terms or to the description of the products or services to be provided. You guys have seen this many times in working with your vendors. Change requests are the formal means to document suggested changes to the terms of the contract and get organizational approval to these changes. Now, you've seen this where you've added features or you've removed features and you've had to change the contract. In some cases, maybe you've even had to change vendors because you needed a different subject matter expertise. Now, almost every contract has what we would call a contract change control system. That means in the contract, it states what needs to be done to change that contract. And so a lot of times people talk about contracts as if they can't be changed, and they're changed every day. So it's not that big of a deal as long as everybody is spelling out what needs to be done and everybody's in agreement. And so management, procurement department, somebody was going to be able to help you jump through those hoops. But anyway, the detail of the process by which the contract can be changed, and that's normally in the contract someplace, Includes the paperwork, tracking systems, dispute resolution procedures, approval levels necessary for authorizing the change. It identifies the procedures, individuals who will approve or deny the changes to the contract. When should a change request be denied, though? So we're talking about it from several aspects, but here's some things to consider. Now, obviously, this isn't going to handle every situation you get into when you're talking about change requests, okay? But when the request is outside of the project scope, and so somebody's just requesting a change, but it doesn't follow the project scope, many times just reiterating the project scope will take care of that. When the change hurts the schedule or budget more than it will benefit the project, that needs to be brought up, that needs to be said to everybody, or when a change cannot be justified. And the reason for that, a lot of times you'll find people who have extra money at the end of the year, so they're wanting extra stuff, might be appropriate to use, that's fine. But the point is, it could be somebody who's just wanting their little pet project to have extra things. And so sometimes that's the time to give some pushback. When should a change be granted? When the change makes the project stronger, when the change fixes an oversight in the goal or purpose of the project, when an analysis is acceptable based on potential cost and time delays due to the change. All of these make it really clear why we want to do a change request, because it makes sense to everyone's there. Now, let's understand that change that makes sense to you does not always make sense to everybody else. A lot of times from the perspective of the customer says this change is only a small change. Well, it might only be a small change to them, but the ripple effect might be enormous. The change doesn't need any analysis. Almost every change needs some type of analysis. Now, you're going to decide that by being on the project team, but it needs some type of analysis. This change will not hurt the project at all. How many times have we all heard this and sitting in a meeting and you think, okay, what perspective are we talking about here? Obviously, it's going to hurt the project because we're going in one direction. Now we're changing gears to go in a different direction. This change should have been part of the original plan. Now, there are times all of these happen, and there's times that it should have been part of the original plan. But the original plan according to who? If we interviewed and gathered requirements correctly, people signed off on the scope statement, why are we just now hearing about this requirement now? And so that could signify things that need to be worked on in spite of this. Now, let's talk about dealing with specific concerns and problems of the project change. Okay. So one of those is going to be the communication of this. Now, part of that project change request, who we're going to notify, excuse me, who we're going to notify, all of that's going to make a huge difference in these type of things, because it's going to play a role in the meetings we're going to have, the justification that we're going to have. Notice the change control board and the sponsor. You're conducting a cost schedule impact analysis. The change is granted. You're communicating. Are you denying it to the customer? Are you updating it to the customer? You're making the change, communicating a verification that the change has happened. You're putting it in the change log. And so all of these are part of that communication. And sometimes you'll even see on a team where one member on the team did not know that this change request had been approved, and they're still working on something that they should have stopped working on earlier, but that bad communication. And if that's ever happened to you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Very frustrating, very upsetting to that team member. Okay, so what you should verify in the request for a change. So here's some things. Number one, is the change detailed and clear? Is the reason behind the change understandable, and are we communicating that? Is this change mandated or only a suggestion? A lot of times people will suggest stuff, they'll ask questions. You'll see managers do this or executives do this. They ask a question, but they're not saying make a change. They're just asking a question. Why did we not do this? Why did we not try this? Is there some sort of penalty if the change is not carried out? Is there enough data to follow through with the change? We think something's going to happen, but we haven't really done an analysis, but do we have enough data? Now, so you're looking at proposed work compared to actual work, and that's what you're having to look at here. So a lot of things feed into this. with some of the rework that might have to happen. But change and rework cycle, you're looking at the resources, the productivity, the quality assurance, and the actual work. And so this change and rework cycle makes a difference, especially when you're talking about a change order. Because if that change order was for rework, was it because of bad resources? Was it because of low productivity? Was it because of bad quality assurance? What's the reason we're having to do this rework right now? And what's the reason that rework happened in the first place? Okay, so let's talk about deal with setbacks and go forward. Every project almost always will have some type of setback, some type of issue. No big deal. We all have. That's why we're all on medication, is because we're in project management. We deal with these setbacks and deal with these situations. Okay, so we've learned over the years how to do that and move forward with our projects. So number one, learn from the setback. The reason you're a good project manager today is because something happened in the past and you learned from it. Keep failure in perspective. Nobody's perfect. There's no silver bullet for project management. Everybody struggles with something in project management. And so be as upbeat, be as positive as you can be about the project, be an encourager to your team, because a lot of times things look pretty bleak when you're trying to run projects or trying to deal with cantankerous people. Build self-confidence. If you mess up, admit your mistake. If you didn't hear something right, made a decision, missing a piece of information, all of those are part of project management at times. Use humor and laughter at times. Your people need to laugh and move forward. The goal in project management is to inch that project forward at all times. Now, if we're trying to learn from failure, that means what can we do? In other words, I can't go do this, or we can't accomplish this, then what can I do? Because you're trying to inch it forward. What is good failure? Anytime I can learn from something that went south, that's going to be good failure for me. What can we do next to be able to do this differently? Are there new approaches, new technologies that would help us? Do we see leaders who have surfaced during that time of turmoil and failure that let you see that this person has leadership abilities that's going to be very beneficial in the future? Now, let me give you a summary of some of the successful change that we're talking about. Preparation prior to the change, power to change, timing of the change, equipping the staff for change, upper management support for the change, communication plans for it, role models are followed, visions, missions are followed, praise, recognition, all of that is huge. Okay, so let's talk about the change request form itself. Excuse me. All right, documenting a change request with a change request form. Change request form can have a lot of different components, but you definitely want to have a name on there of who's requesting that change, because it's going to come up possibly some other time. A description of the request. You want people to be able to provide detailed information, additional documentation such as diagrams, charts if applicable. A reason for the request, not just that they want to change, but what benefit is it going to be. And so by providing the information about why, the key word there is why this request is important, is everything in a change request. Any risk if it's not implemented. If we didn't do this change, what impact would it have to the project, to the organization, to profits, any of those kind of things. Risk if it is implemented, because there's going to be risk possibly even if we do this. So describe the risk associated for making the change. What's the amount of work effort required? Use a field or a chart to describe the team's findings regarding the work effort. In other words, this is going to take us 50 more hours or 500 more hours. And then duration required. Document the amount of time you will need to implement the change request. And so you're talking about time for planning, then time for implementation, and then testing possibly in that situation. What about resources? Document the resources you need to make the change. Be specific about the type of resources needed. I'm talking about, could be the roles, the responsibilities, the quality level, the particular positions, and then specify the exact people needed. If it's certain key subject matter experts, who are those people that need to be there? And then let's talk a little bit about the change request log. The change request log is a master list of all the changes that have been approved and rejected. That's what it is. So it's a tool for keeping track of multiple change requests. It's normally paper or it's electronic. It's a mechanized spreadsheet. A simple database has it, but it normally tells who requested the change, approved or rejected, the impact it had on the project. All of those different change orders are going to be listed there. Now, what you're trying to do is move away from unmanaged changes. That means that things are just dropped on you in the hallway, okay? So managed compared to unmanaged, there's an interdependency between change management and risk management. Each risk management strategy can result in changes that generate additional risk. A lot of times when people are talking about change orders and that's related to risk, they're trying to make this change because they don't like this risk. But we can't stop there. The change they're putting into place probably has risk as well. So we have to play that out and do some analysis on if we do this instead, what risk is going to come about from it. All right, let me go close out here with just a couple of things and then tell you about a new service that we've got coming out. You're my first group to hear about this. First off, on Project Change, if you and your people need more training, we do a 2-day and a 3-day on Project Change. A 2-day, how to implement, track, and control change. We do the activities in the classroom face-to-face, or we can do it through live instructor-led, just like we have here, and do the full 2-day, full 3-day. And everybody has notebooks. We'll ship them out to you and the whole thing. But the 3-day is a systematic approach to controlling change, so it's a little bit deeper than the 2-day. And once again, we can do both of these with instructor-led virtual. But let me explain also what's happening next month. Next month, we're going to be talking about the business analysis, the BA role in project management. So that's what our webinar is going to be about. And so you sign up for that if you haven't already. I think we've got a huge list of people already signed up on that. And then let me talk to you about what we've got coming. In July of 2020, July 6th through 14th, we have a free 7-day mini course that you're going to be able to get in. It's going to be worth 7 PDUs, and this free mini course is going to focus on several different areas. And so it's going to be posted. Kim's going to have it posted on our website before long. And so you'll have an opportunity to do that. You'll get other information about it in the mail, but it's entitled Free 7-Day Mini Course Running Successful Projects, July 6th through 14th. You'll tap in each day. You'll have a little bit of a discussion board. You'll have a video that you'll watch each day for 7 days, and you'll get 7 PDUs out of that for free. As we look at it, we're going to be talking about gathering requirements, planning process, execution, monitoring control, and closing. So those are the areas we're going to look at for those 7 days. And so you're going to have I will have one day where I will actually have a call in where I'll do a video conference, and anybody who wants to call in and ask questions, you can ask questions as part of it. But it's going to be a 7-day mini course running successful projects. So if you want to be part of that because you need the PDUs, that's great. But here's the thing. If you've got people who need project development, this is going to be a good course because there's going to be people around the country, even possibly around the world, tapping in on this. And so every one of these webinars, we have people not just in North America or not just in the United States, but we have them throughout North America. So if you have people who are needing the extra training, then sign them up for this when we get this out. Now, where do you sign up? You'll see the site will be projectcoachingexpert.com. That's going to take you right to the link, but it's brand spanking new. So I don't know that the link is working today because you're my first people to know about this. But you can go to the Mathis Group. You can also email keith@themathisgroup.com or do the 800 number. Don't sign up yet. You're going to see it here in the next few days. But this gives you the information first of all to anybody out here. But you'll see this advertised on our link. Kim will send it out with her newsletter. It will be sent out by email, so you're not going to miss this as it comes out. But that's what's going to be coming up in the near future. Then behind this, starting in November, we're going to do an intensive 12-week coaching program, group coaching program. It's going to be live, virtual. People will be signing in from a lot of different industries. That will not be free, but it will be worth 24 PDUs. And so we will give you more information about that, but we're going to be moving to a group coaching program because people are needing coaching, people are asking for coaching, one-on-one coaching, but there's not enough time to just do one person. So we're going to be offering that service in addition to this down the road here. So you'll hear more information about that. So that will be a 12-week long 24 PDUs group coaching program. And so you'll tap in a couple of times each session, and you'll give discussion boards. You'll come up with checklists, and we'll give you some ideas. You'll have some small assignments, but the point is that we'll coach you for 12 weeks. So that's a 3-month coaching program that will be coming out to help people be able to do this. All right, now we're at the end of our program. And so what kind of questions do you have before we get off of here? I'm willing to answer any type of question. Let me get this up here. What kind of questions do you have, if anything? Any questions from anybody? All right. Well, let me thank you so much for being part of this. And you'll be getting an email link sent out after this gets processed so that you'll be able to do it. And you'll be getting your PDU code sent out to you by email as well. So thank you so much for being part of this. I know we had a ton of people on here. I had to use the webinar mode in order to be able to get everybody in. So thank you so much for being on board here. Sign up for be watching for the 7-day mini course that's going to be coming out. Take a look at it and get some of your people involved in this. This is going to be free. It's not going to cost them anything, and it's worth 7 PDUs. So you guys have a great and blessed week. God bless you. Have a good day. Bye now.